All right, all right. What's going on, people? Hope everybody's well. Let's see here. All right. There we go. Back in here. Let's see what the problem is. There we go. Now we back in action. What's good, people? Welcome back to the Onyx Report. Black Masculinist news for the day. Right? Where we as Black male justice advocates uplift Black men and boys using critical analysis. Hope everybody's well on this Monday. You know, shout out to some of the brothers that came through early. What's good, Corey? AB Media, what's happening, man? Always good to see AB Media. Make sure you support the AB Media channel. What's up, Ron? Ahmed, what's going on? Andre, got Jay Shabazz, what's happening? Donnie, what's up? Busy Mike, Jamal, AJ, what's good? John, AJ, what's up? Mount Siku, Silent Warrior, what's happening? Yeah, welcome back, y'all. Man, it's in here chilling. Just picked up Black Star's new album. If you haven't heard anything about it, it's called No Fear of Time. I think I don't know if it was, well, I just downloaded it. I bought it legally from them. I bought the digital version, but just letting you know, Black Star just came back out and I'm just now catching up with CL Smooth and Peter Gunn. So getting back into my bag, you know, listening to some of the artists that I've liked for a long time. So check it out when you get a chance. Anyway, like, subscribe, share. I'm forgetting everything. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you will, so we can continue to bring you this independent Black male thought. You know the way, you know the deal, right? Patreon, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or you can do the super chat thing right up here. But support the channel so we can keep it moving for you. Also, if you haven't already, shout out to T Fitness. Appreciate that Cash App. You can do so. You can do the Cash App thing right here. And also, don't forget to pick up the book, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Flat Blackness and Black Male Death, The Black Masculinist Turn. So make sure you support, if you can, and pick up some stuff that I think will be useful to you. Also, mentioned to you guys last week that, you know, on the Institute for Black Male Studies website, we got the shirts up, just the new shirts that came in on the 18-point Black male political agenda. So if you're at all interested in actually representing the agenda, you can do so by picking up a shirt, if you so choose. Then, of course, if you want to access the agenda itself, please make sure that you do. You'll notice that right up at the top, there's a downloadable PDF version. Shout out to Compassionate and Callous. Made a beautiful version of it. So go ahead and download that if you so choose. And if you're interested, you can also just right below it, you can pick up a hard copy version, have it sent directly to you for $21.45 without shipping. It only ships to US and Canada, but those are the options available. And I just post these because this is what brothers asked me for. Said they wanted a PDF version, they wanted a hard copy version. So I'm like, yo, there it is. That's what you asked for. Shout out to Wrench Turner. Appreciate that support. Since Revelation ain't free, support Black Male Media. Salute, Doc. Appreciate that, man. Shout out to Passport OG in the house. Make sure y'all support the Passport OG channel. What's good with you, man? Also, Snowman Media. What's happening? Y'all check out Snowman Media, Multimedia. Apologize for getting the name wrong. Let's see. Got a few brothers that snuck in here. Let's see if this mic is. Bear with me 1 second. There's too much going on. Looks like it's about to fall off the stand. All right. Slowly getting it together, y'all. You see what I'm dealing with. Just got to keep up with the little things. Anyway, shout out to John Hardaway. What's good? Michael, what's up? And Money Cash in the building. Aaron, Triv, what's happening? Yeah. But we're not going to be here too long tonight. Just a few things to cover. that I think are important. But I just wanted to get a few things on the record so that we could actually make sure we're all well informed. So y'all know how we do. All right. So jumping in, first thing I wanted to kind of make sure we stay on top of is apparently there's a rash of lynchings that are jumping off. This is the second one that I've mentioned within the last week on my channel. Shout out to black males. I appreciate that. Hope you're well. But this is on Blavity. You know, if you're interested. Right, black man who sued Alabama police for brutality, found dead and hanging from rope. Yeah. Hold on, let me try. My mic is doing something weird. Okay, hopefully. Anyway, so yeah, so we're going to go through a little bit of this. This is dated October 20th this year. Says Dennis Richardson, a black man in Alabama who recently filed a lawsuit against police for brutality, is now dead. On September 28th, his body was found in an abandoned house near the Mississippi line in Colbert County, Alabama. Civil rights attorney Roderick Van Daniel said Richardson was hanging by a rope. While Richardson's loved ones are now fighting for justice, Colbert County Sheriff Eric Ballantyne said his death was ruled a suicide. Now, that's the second time in the last week I found a lynching ruled as a suicide. We received a call of a suspicious vehicle at a residence on Highway 72 on the west side of Colbert County, Ballantyne said. When our deputies go down to investigate the suspicious vehicle, they located Mr. Richardson. He was hanging from a beam on the carport. Richardson's wife, Lee Ann Richardson, refutes the sheriff's statement. She says, "I need answers. This was made to look like a suicide. It's not a suicide." According to Lee, police in Sheffield, Alabama, repeatedly arrested and harassed her husband after he filed his lawsuit on February 26 against several officers and Police Lieutenant Max Dotson, saying deputies abused him while he was in jail from November 30th until December 1st, 2022. Lee said officers vowed to drop the charges against Richardson if he dropped the federal lawsuit. It was a bribe to make him drop the lawsuit, and he never would. Sheffield Mayor Steve Stanley said he knew Richardson personally, and he's sorry to hear of the death. But I've had a couple of meetings with Dennis in the past, and they've always been civil and congenial. He said, I certainly didn't harbor any ill will against him. Richardson, who was arrested on drug charges, named several Sheffield police officers along with Dotson in his lawsuit. He said Dotson and the other officers kept him in a restrained chair while he was jailed and told him nobody can help you. Lawsuit adds that police tased the 39-year-old in his cell and sprayed him with mace. According to the complaint, Richardson faced a second-degree assault charge against Dotson. Richardson, who was back in jail earlier this year, also pointed to an alleged incident on January 9th. He said he wanted to call 911 for medical assistance at the time, but officers took the phone from him and threw him down. Per the lawsuit, police then charged Richardson for making a false emergency report. Ballantyne and Richardson was allowed to get out of jail and travel out of state to be with a relative after he was incarcerated on a drug charge. Right after the release, he told his probation officer that he was not going to comply with the restrictions of the release, so a warrant was issued for his arrest. According to Lee, Richardson chose his uncle in the state of Washington as his guardian for probation. However, to have his uncle as his guardian, Richardson would have to move to Washington because he was required to be close to him. According to Lee, Richardson did not want to move away from his children, so he chose to turn himself in and serve his time. She adds that Richardson last spoke to her on September 26th and went from there. So I'm just going to leave. I'll put the link in the description box so you can go through the rest of this at your leisure. But this is what we're looking at, right? So apparently he was, supposedly he had committed suicide. I highly doubt it. But the reality is a lot of this can happen to any of us. So make sure that you spread the word and keep your eye on it, because this is happening to more than one brother. So it is what it is, but we got to stay on it. All right. Second piece up before we get to the main topic. I thought this was interesting. I just ran across this. Thought I wanted to share it. You guys might find it pretty eye-opening, right? So this is coming from KCTV 5, right, in Kansas City, Missouri. It says 23 states come together to fight attempted changes to Title IX. This is interesting. Basically, what you have here is women who are trying to clarify whether or not Title IX should include, really, at the end of the day, trans. But I'll go ahead and officially read it so we can have the official record on here. Kansas City, Missouri, female athletes have come together with the attorney generals for 23 states to back the state of Kansas in a suit that demands attempts to redefine Title IX stop. Right, so they're trying to challenge the attempt for Title IX to be redefined. The Alliance Defending Freedom has announced that women's advocates, female athletes, scholars, and 23 states have filed friend of the court briefs against an attempt to redefine the word sex as gender identity in Title IX. In the case of state of Kansas versus U.S. Department of Education, attorneys who represent students and female athletes affected by the rule joined Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach, as well as AGs from Alaska, Utah, and Wyoming, to file the suit in May. Title IX does not provide clear notice that it extends to sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination. The statute's text, structure, and aim show that it bars discrimination based on biological sex. The brief, led by the state of Mississippi and joined by 22 other states, explains nearly 30 years after Title IX's enactment, the Department of Education declared Title IX does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Just a few years ago, the department reaffirmed that Title IX's prohibition on sex discrimination does not encompass discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. I'll get to it in a second. It's only got a little bit left, so let me just kind of power through real quick. In July, a federal district court in the Sunflower State issued an injunction to halt the attempt to rewrite Title IX as the case continues. The injunction covers every school attended by plaintiffs, members of the Female Athletes United, members of Young America's Foundation, and the children of the members of Moms for Liberty. Pursuant to this novel rewriting of Title IX, the department demands that schools allow males to use women's locker rooms and seemingly requires that men identifying as women be permitted to compete in women's sports. It's promulgated these demands through a final rule that is both arbitrary and contrary to law. The brief filed by the Independent Women's Law Center, Women's Declaration International USA, and Concerned Women for America states, as University of Pennsylvania swimmer Paula Scanlon experienced stripping nude and showering before a male 18 times per week caused her as a woman tangible sex-based harm. Title IX cannot plausibly be interpreted to require that. Yeah. So we've been hearing this last few years about biological males playing in women's sports, using women's bathrooms, using women's locker rooms and gyms, so on and so forth. So now you have women organizing to try and prevent Title IX from being redefined to include that, which I find interesting. I'm going to show you why. Because Black men went through something like this. And it actually speaks to one of the points on the 18-point Black male political agenda. Right? So coming down here, it actually speaks to point 15 on Title VII reform. So I'm bringing this up because basically white women don't want the same thing that happened to them that happened to Black men, essentially. That's really what's going on in a particular way. So they perceive trans issues and whatnot as a threat to them, and so they're we're seeing these kind of gender politics kind of redefining policies like Title IX. But they didn't have a problem when white women were the ones to benefit, especially over Black men, when something similar happened on Title VII. So this is number 15 on the Black male political agenda. This is a federal issue. It says amend Title VII. This is Title VII reform, right? Amend Title VII, Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let me get this thing out. Close that. There we go. Hold on. Anyway. Are you serious? It's ridiculous. You're doing way too much. All right. Sorry about that. Amend Title VII by removing the addition of sex to the act, as it has been detrimental to Black males and by extension Black families. The removal of sex from Title VII would be more in line with the spirit of the act as originally proposed in 1964 and would position both Black men and women as the righteous recipients of affirmative action resources and entitlements. It would also, A, help to close the racial wealth gap, while B, closing the wage gap between Black men and white men, and C, remove the double minority status of Black women and be fairer to Black men as far as employment positions, be they administrative, electoral, or white collar, and educational access. You can also see Tommy J. Curry's Feminist as Racist Backlash, understanding how the will to dominate Black Americans drove the development of 19th and 20th century feminist theory. On Congressman Howard C. Smith and the feminist takeover of Title VII to derail the civil rights movement's gains. This should also be used to prioritize the hiring or acquisition of Black males in federal and state positions or institutions who get federal contracts or monies, such as in terms of college recruitment, but also in software, tech, retail, public schools, post office, law enforcement, military, and fire departments. So in essence, I found that piece real interesting because white women are trying to prevent from being usurped. They're trying to prevent from having their positions shifted, having the policies really transfer from the spirit of the policy, which was to foreground women's issues, and seeing it go to other demographics, right? So it's ironic that they are upset about this, but had no problem when Black males found themselves usurped by those very same women in a very similar gesture, going back to 1964. So I just thought we should put that on the table. And it also should let you know that it's not like these things can't be challenged, although it does require a great deal of resources. It does require legal representation, but it's not impossible. So it is something we need to think about when we're, pushing the Black male political agenda. Shout out to JD. Says Dr. T is needed in these YouTube streets. Thanks for another live. Appreciate that, man. What's up, Hashim? What's going on? Yeah. John says facts. They can dish it out, but they can't take it. That's real talk. And they dishing it out, man. They are livid. They are trying to get this pushed back by any means necessary. But when it starts happening to them, all of a sudden laws need to change. Right? So as long as they benefit, everything's cool. Anyway, we're not going to be here all night. This is just something that I thought was interesting and I wanted to kind of deal with. This is, let me go ahead and pull it up. So this is actually a video that just came out the other day. And it's an interview with Richard Reeves. And many of you know, I've talked about Richard Reeves a few times on my channel. I read through his book. I did a walkthrough of his book and a couple of interviews that he's given in the past. I don't entirely disagree with him or anything of that nature, but sometimes I just think some of the things he argues can use some clarification. Right? And so this is one of those times. So basically, this is an interview he gave on the issue of men being needed. And I think actually a lot of what he said I agreed with. I just think he was missing something that I wanted to kind of add to that discussion. So I'll have the link for the original YouTube video in the comment and the description once I'm done. So you guys can feel free to check it out yourselves. It's only about 10 or 11 minutes long. So we're going to go through the video. I'm going to stop it along the way. But as you guys know on this channel, I'm always hit with copyright issues. So when I play videos, usually I just use still images and we listen to it technically. So that's going to be the case here as well. So I don't get hit with those issues, but it's still, fair use. So check this out. So this is Richard Reeves on male, what I call male neededness, right? And you'll see what I mean in a moment. Here we go.
Men, why do we need dads? And that's
okay. Give me a 1 if you guys could hear that. I just want to make sure that is something you can hear. Let me see. There we go. Got a couple 1s. All right. So, so I will let it continue. Talking about whether or not men are needed. Shout out to Layman's Journal. Y'all support the Layman's Journal channel, doing some excellent work over there. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you join, make sure you check out his Patreon where he drops the full videos without content, without, trying to hide what he's doing. He gets to the point. So make sure you check out the Patreon. But anyway, continuing with Richard Reeves.
Much more kind of recent phenomenon in the sense of being dads. And the answer is because actually, there's this amazing work by Anna Machin. She's an anthropologist at the University of Oxford about fatherhood. And she's, so I'm just paraphrasing her now, but she has this wonderful description of how we invented fatherhood because we went bipedal. Do you know all this?
No.
And the baby's head thing? It's amazing. So we had this bit of a crisis X hundreds of thousands of years ago. I'm terrible at remembering whether it's millions or hundreds of thousands. So
A long time ago.
Google it. Right. Back in the ancestral times is what people say, right? Right. So what happened was we had this massive growth spurt in our brains, in our heads, right? So we've got massive heads, but we also went bipedal. And if you're bipedal, your hips can't be that big. And so women couldn't get the heads of the babies out of their smaller hips, right? So we're actually facing a bit of a crisis. So the way we solved that crisis was by giving birth to babies way earlier than we should. Way earlier. In fact, if we were like other mammals, pregnancies would last about 2 years. So I don't know how women watching will feel about that. Can't speak to that, but 2 years would be about the average, right? We obviously do it 9 months.
I didn't really at this part of the video, I didn't have a lot I wanted to say about it. I just thought it was interesting, and I thought you might want to hear it. Please feel free to drop your opinions on what he's saying in the comment section, and make sure after the video you do the same. I'd like to hear your overall thoughts about all of this. But at this section, this is not the part where I wanted to drop a word. I just thought it was incredibly interesting because I hadn't really heard this before.
So they're incredibly vulnerable, and mum has to literally keep feeding them, right? And the calorific requirements, just the amount of food that they need, mum and baby, was huge. And so dad, go get food, right? This is only going to work. We're only going to survive as humans if this stuff comes. So in a way, that was the invention.
So he's talking about the evolution, and he's dealing with this evolutionarily, right? He's saying, well, I shouldn't say evolutionarily. He's basically arguing that once human beings decided to walk upright, this had an impact on, when and how long pregnancies lasted, how births, how women gave birth, so on and so forth. And he says, out of that context, right, the vulnerability of women, the need to feed children around the clock, so on and so forth, it meant that men now had a very specific role. At least this is what he's arguing. I don't know if I fully buy it yet. I haven't looked into it. I just heard this yesterday, I think, for the first time. But nevertheless, whether I come to agree with it, disagree with it, I do find it interesting. So here we go.
Of fatherhood, and you see the brains of fathers getting activated by all this stuff. So being needed by the community, family, etc., to produce something, to provide something is, I think it's just deeply encoded. It's encoded in our DNA. It's like part of, like, if we're not needed, then we're dead, because we're going to be on our own, right? So these ties, familial ties, tribal ties, are actually central to our identity. And so the danger now is that if people, particularly men, start to feel like, am I needed? Does the community need me? Do my kids need me? Does the woman I've had my children with need me? Am I needed? If the answer to that is not clear, I think that has all kinds of downstream consequences. And we've just done a really poor job of making sure that even in this time of great transition, we still need you. We need every man, every boy, everybody. We need
this question of need is kind of inevitable once you get civilization to a point, especially technology, where things are balanced out on gender terms, most particularly, where men are systematized to provide resources, to provide services to citizens in their given countries or whatnot, in such manner that it doesn't so much require man in the immediate space, right? You can take your car to a mechanic. You don't have to have a husband that knows how to fix cars. You can call in mostly men to fix your roof, so you don't have to have your husband get up and do that. Once you get civilization to a point where such services can be administered on a macro level, and that doesn't require the immediate presence of a man, this question of need becomes an issue. And this is what he's speaking to. So he's essentially saying we've gotten civilization to this point where we're able to kind of mass systematize resources, information, services, and whatnot. So, of course, the question of how needed men are becomes central to this, right? And when you're dealing in the Black community, that as early as the late 60s, if not, well, depending on which generation you want to talk about, it became very common to hear that I don't need a man, right? So this is a Western woman thing, but with Black women in particular, it became somewhere between a mantra and a religion, right? Where women are still claiming independence and strength and whatnot. And it's given in such fashion where it's almost a screw you to men, and black men in particular. This also ties into the political stuff. So we talked last week about the contempt and the resentment that we've seen from women around black men voting for Kamala, whether or not she's going to fail and whether it'll be black men's fault. But if she is elected, we know black men are not going to be cheered for anything. So, but the kind of contempt is what I'm referring to, and how consistent that's been, especially in the last 50 years. He's speaking to how, on a certain degree, a certain level, this is a product of advancing or creating an advanced civilization where women don't necessarily need men on an immediate level for their survival, because men have been giving their resources in systemic fashion widespread. So you don't necessarily have to have a male protector as long as you can call the police. Right? These services are extended systemically on a macro level. So let's get back to need and what it does to men.
You. We don't yet know exactly what we need you for, but by God, we need you. We cannot afford to lose you. You are precious. And we need you. You know,
he's talking about how society needs to tell men how needed they are, because in the long term, the blowback from this will be too devastating. So on an immediate level, where, you know, especially women will say, I don't really need a man. I have this and that, and many of them may not. But what he's saying is the impending blowback on a macro level, once again, of men not feeling needed is going to create a context much worse than what many imagine. Shout out to 2Trib for the cash. I appreciate that. And he's saying, so if we do this, if we allow for this to continue without telling men where they're needed, and we're already seeing a massive withdrawal of men and young men from participation in society, the repercussions of that are not worth it for the larger society. But it's hard to get women to understand that at this earliest stage. And even though I feel like it's a late stage, but at this stage, it's still hard to get women to understand that. But he's essentially, Reeves is begging, not just for society in general, but he's really begging women to, you know, change course in how they're acting before the repercussions are irrevocable. Now, they may already be, but at the end of the day, this whole conversation really is him begging women to really pay attention to what you're doing, because you're about to create a context that you don't want to see the end result of.
I don't know what you're going to go on to be yet, but by God, our community cannot afford to lose you. And so that message of just like how much we need you, I just think we've lost a little bit of that in recent debates. And too many men have drawn the conclusion that maybe they aren't needed, with tragic consequences.
A few questions there, just because I want to make sure I'm clear. Fiona's work in Australia around these letters that men had left before they had died by suicide. Did she also look at the letters that women had left?
No, she only looked at men.
Okay, fine. That's my first question.
Yeah.
And for me, the key thing in the suicide stats is that it's increasing.
Mm-hmm.
It's increasing.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're saying that it's a case of men not feeling needed, then why is that sense that men aren't needed increasing?
I'm really glad that they're bringing up suicide here, because it really speaks to the most extreme version of male withdrawal. But shout out to Adrian Aquarius, who dropped something that I think is important, right? Because when you get comfortable in your day-to-day reality, when the weather's good and you're making money and your job is going fine and the kids are fed and bills are relatively paid, or at least you have a plan on the table, it's easy to say you don't need a man. And those of us in the Black community who grew up with a single parent, we grew up in an environment where we saw women really taking pride in being able to live that out. But when an emergency takes place, whether we're talking about, you know, a war, whether we're talking about a storm or a tragedy or a flood, then all of a sudden you start to hear the need for men. So Adrian says the last hurricane in Houston had women crying to linemen to have the power back so they could do content on OnlyFans and TikTok. All right. Right. But I saw numerous videos from women who were saying, we just need men to bring chainsaws to cut down some of these trees. We need men to come help with cars and give us rides. In other words, whenever you have a natural disaster or some type of an emergency, it's a reminder how badly men are needed. But as long as there isn't a disaster, as long as things remain relatively calm, people get quite comfortable telling men to screw off, while at the same time, relying on men just as much as they used to when we had this nuclear family dynamic. It's just that they don't have to necessarily think about it as men because the services for men are systematized. So you can call a repairman, you can call the police officer, you can call all these different institutions that are still overwhelmingly male, but you can convince yourself that you don't need a man because you have the system of men. And that, of course, doesn't even include government, right? So all of this is on the table. And he's saying that it's gotten so extreme that the suicide rates are increasing. And, you know, if you've read my book, with Black males, it's increasing even more, right? So, and I can't think of any demographic of men that sometimes feel unappreciated and unneeded more than Black men.
If we're saying there's some kind of link between those two ideas.
Yes, because the extent to which they're needed is less clear now than it was. Right? So it was very clear before that you're needed because you're the breadwinner.
Okay.
You're the provider, right? So go back, and I think part of the point here is that this idea of being kind of, this gets us into discussions about masculinity, but being generative, like producing, providing, it gets narrowed down to like the breadwinner model of like post-war Western societies, like it's like a wage earner, but that's not all it means. It used to mean going and getting meat. It used to mean helping farm together. There's all kinds of ways you can be a provider.
Service, I guess, as well, just like...
Yeah, it's about being more... There's this great line from C.S. Lewis, the very good theologian, but obviously much better known for his work on The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the Chronicles of Narnia. But he had this lovely line, and he was talking here about what it meant to be a Christian. But I think it applies to what it means to be a mature man as well. He said, you shouldn't think less of yourself. You should just think of yourself less. And there's something about service and like just doing for others.
I think what some of the brothers are already laying down, you already know, this is my interpretation, or my response, I should say, to what he just laid out there. This idea of thinking of yourself less, of providing service. I'm going to let him expound on it, but at the end of the day, I'm always careful about that kind of language, because I think when you start suggesting, urging, or shaming men to go back into a framework of providing service with no reciprocity, you end up back where we started. I mean, you're talking about suicide, you're talking about social withdrawal, you're talking about diminishing family formation, you're talking about diminishing numbers of birth, the diminishing birth rates. I mean, a lot of this is tied to very similar things. So, you know, if people are going to start pushing men to provide these resources, but offering nothing in return. Because here's the thing, the old school idea, right? We think of the traditional nuclear family, we think of that dynamic was always an exchange. It was never a one-way thing, the way a lot of feminists and a lot of women interpret it. I mean, even to this day, when you see women decide that they're tired of being strong and independent, look at what they talk about. They talk about, okay, fine, I'm ready for a man to come take care of me. Right? This is their interpretation of the older model, right? The so-called outdated 50s model. Their interpretation of it is that they will tolerate and allow male service. The thought of reciprocity doesn't even cross their mind. So when you look at, you know, our grandmothers and great grandmothers' generation, it wasn't that they sat back and kicked their feet up and men serviced them. No, they provided resources, whether those resources were domestic, whether they were child-centered, whether they had to do with cooking and cleaning, whether they had to do with emotional support and providing a sense of peace in the home environment, regardless of what that is. And there's a larger cultural narrative on what that looks like. And then there's what a man and woman negotiate within the context of their relationship. But women never just sat back and received. It was always an exchange. And women at this point, when they imagine what it means to operate outside of a feminist and strong independent framework, they think of it solely in terms of benefiting. Right? So this is one of the things you hear. I saw a video a couple of years ago where one woman was saying, you know what, I'm ready to have a man again because I need a man to come sweep out all this snow so I can get to my car out in front of my house. Nothing about what she was going to give, nothing about reciprocities. It was simply that she was willing to put down her feminist armor so that a man could come serve her. And then you found women surprised that for some reason that didn't work. And of course, many of them started to blame men for being, you know, misogynists and sexist and, you know, all these kind of things. But at no point did they actually even talk to men about what men want. So it just became this kind of almost narcissistic kind of, you're going to come serve me because I'm going to now allow you to. And that was the only framework. So when they start talking about, men just providing a service and it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. Men are at a point where we've had 50 years of feminism, and it needs to be a laid out contract to some extent. It has reached the point where it has to be on some level transactional, in the sense that I have to know, you at least know what you're going to extend to me, and I'm going to have to decide beforehand if that's going to be enough. We've gotten to that point. We no longer have a culture where men and women are socialized and trained within families to know what to do. Now we actually have to discuss it. And if you have no sense whatsoever that you even need to reciprocate to men, you have a lot of men that are just withdrawn. It's not worth the trouble.
Your family, your community, etc., that I think is quite intrinsic to these ideas of mature masculinity. And if men don't feel as if they are necessary or encouraged to have a kind of distinct and important role in the family, in the community, then I think that kind of question mark over, well, am I needed anymore, is a real one. And lots of people like Margaret Mead, anthropologist in the 70s, and a lot of conservatives were saying, look, if women do achieve a significant degree of economic independence, she thought that was a wonderful thing. The conservatives didn't, right? But they all agreed that we will have to think really hard about men. How do we make sure that men still feel connected and needed in our society if we have very quickly changed the central way in which they express that?
A few things came to mind. So it's interesting. Before I move forward on this point, when you were talking about this idea of humans needing to be needed, it made me reflect on some of the stats that came out around how quickly someone dies after they retire.
Yeah.
And that kind of general narrative that if you retire, you don't have long left, which is kind of, this idea of a social tribe and feeling like you need to be serving the tribe in some way. I've always wondered if there was any truth to that, this idea that, retirement can speed up your mortality because you're, so it's almost like there's something in your body. Either one or two things could be happening.
Yeah, I've seen this. And I've actually had I don't know, I call him a momentary mentor. There was a point when I was in graduate school where I was invited to teach in, Albuquerque, New Mexico, for one summer in the Africana Studies department at University of New Mexico, I think it was. And I met an elder gentleman there, and he was talking to me about retirement. And he was saying that he was, a retired professor, so on and so forth. But the thing that he said to me that really blew my mind, though, is he said, all my friends are dead. He said, all my friends are dead. He said, the moment my friends each reached retirement age and stopped working, they sat down in front of a TV and they died. He said, the only reason I'm the only one still alive is that I never sat down. He said, when I retired, he said, I'm out of the house every day. I play golf, I do this, I do that. And he listed all the things he does. And he's like a gadfly. He's everywhere around town. He said, that's what keeps him alive. He said, but all his friends who sat down, turned the TV on after retirement, they all died. Which is becoming more and more relevant to me, especially now that I hit 50, where I'm thinking about things that I wasn't thinking about when I was in my 20s listening to this. I think I just filed it in the file cabinet and left it alone. But as I'm getting older, it's starting to come back in, and I'm starting to really listen to some of these things. So I find it interesting that they're talking about this, whether the relationship between retirement and death, most particularly for men, right? What does it mean for us, and how does it affect our life expectancy? Here we go.
For one, you just sit around more, which means,
you're more sedentary.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to kill you anyway. But number two is that there's almost, I don't know, I've pondered this idea that there's this almost device in our brains that makes us the tribe. And when it knows that we might have switched from becoming useful to the tribe to becoming burdensome to the tribe in some way, now that we're consuming resources but providing none, this device in our brain like turns us off or something.
Yeah, that's what we're done. We are surplus to requirements.
Yeah, we're surplus
and so the decent thing to do is just die
for the tribe.
For the tribe.
And that we theoretically, from an evolutionary standpoint, we
I gotta say, Donnie is an excellent point. That has more to do with activity and purpose, not necessarily being needed. Now, there's one thing I left out of the story with the older man who was telling me this. He did tell me at that time that because he was there on that campus because the campus called him in. He was retired. They called him in because they needed his help with something. So he came back to consult. And he was saying just being out there and staying active gave him not only a sense of purpose, but had people calling him for things that they needed from him. It made him feel like he still had relevance. So the two are kind of tied together, but I do appreciate you bringing up the difference between the two. I think it's important for us to stay active, which is something I'm working on now. I'm trying to find hobbies because I forgot what they were after raising a son. But at the same time, being needed is still part of this equation. Whether I like it, whether you like it, there are men who are taking their own lives behind not being needed. Here we go.
We evolved as tribes, so it's not impossible that there's some,
Well, I do think that of course, we didn't used to live anything like as long.
Yeah.
This is a stat that I came across today, this new book that's just come out, which was in 1963, the most common age of death was 1, and now it's 83 or whatever, right? Do you know what I mean? It's like, so the progress we've made towards greater life expectancy generally has been huge, but it has then asked these questions about kind of being needed later on in life. So there's a couple of things I would say. One is that like having a job is just a massively powerful way of feeling needed, right? Just showing up. Like we need you to start to open up at 6. We need you to like, and in fact, Arthur Brooks, who used to run the American Enterprise Institute, he tells this wonderful story. He was interviewing this guy who'd come out of prison, was in this new program, rehabilitation, etc. And he's just chatting to him, and the guy gets a text while he's chatting to him, and he bursts into tears. Like, gets really tearful. And Arthur says, "Is everything all right? Did you get like some bad news? What's happening? Is this bad news?" And he said, "No, it's the opposite." And he showed the text to Arthur, and the text just said, "Fred, can you get over here as soon as possible? I really need you." And the guy said to Arthur, "I've never heard anyone say that sentence to me before. I've never had anyone say to me, 'I need you.'" And in this case, it was, "I need you to come and," I don't even know what it was, right? "Fix this floor tile, deal with this customer." I don't know, but I need you. And it brought this guy to tears because he hadn't kind of felt that sense of neededness before. And at its best, the workplace signals to us on a daily basis, or however, like, yeah, you're needed, right? Your colleagues need you. They need each other. That's huge. And so if you then don't have that in the labor market, maybe because you've retired, the question is, are you still needed? And then I just think we have to reinvent the ways in which we can make use of the skills and wisdom of the people who've suddenly got time. So my mum, she volunteers as a reader in a primary school because she has time, right? And it's amazing. She gets to know the kids really well, and she loves it, and so on. My father, he's on the board of a technical thing, and he runs charity. They do stuff, right? They raise money for all these because they've got time. And so they're contributing to the community in a new way. And actually, as more and more women work, those community roles that were previously very often filled by moms at home, like school volunteering, for example, right? Now they can be done by older people. And so part of this story here, I think, is also making sure that older people don't lose that sense too, because although we focus quite rightly on what's happening to young men, the suicide rates among older men are also very high. Yeah. Especially if they end up on their own. So kind of men on their own later in life are at massive risk, because if you take my theory about being needed quite seriously, they're just looking around and saying, will anyone even notice if I'm gone? Maybe they'll be better off. And so even for those older men, we have a job of work to do to make them feel really like, yeah, we need you. Your church needs you. Your scout group needs you. Your local charity needs you. Your neighbors need you. The kid across the street who needs help with his university applications needs you. The boy down the road who's like struggling a bit because, his parents have split up and just wants someone to give him a cup of tea every now and again and talk to him. They need you.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel,
I'm sure it's probably part of a longer kind of interview, but I just found that portion interesting. However, I do think that there were there's still something else to be covered. Now, let me see. Now, this was something where'd it go? Oh, there it is. All right. So this is something I posted. This was a little video clip that I posted onto Facebook, and I had at least 15 men write me in response to this short video. I want to see if you guys can hear it before I let it play. So let's just see. Tell me if you guys can hear this at all.
thriving.
Okay, so could you hear that? Even if it's just a little bit of music in the front part, give me a 1 if you could hear it. If not, I have to do something, figure something else out for you guys to be able to watch it. Okay, Donnie says 1. Beautiful. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and play this real quick. Let's see, there we go. Here we go. All right. Give it the full screen. It's about 1 minute and 30 seconds.
We're thriving because of you. Like, I'm able to get a new phone because of you. I'm able to go get my eyes tested and get new glasses tomorrow because of you. I'm able to have somebody come in here and clean because of you. I'm able to make a meal for not just our family, but Crystal and Brad because of you. Like, you're not just keeping us afloat, you're driving us. And I appreciate you so much. Like, you, the way you lavish your love on us is insane. Like, you take such good care of us. You are such an incredible provider. And I don't just mean financially. Like, you're an incredible provider for our family. Like, I had expectations of what you were going to be like, and you have far surpassed them. Like, I am overwhelmed with what a great provider you are for our family. I am so blessed, and I'm so grateful that you're my husband. I just want you to know that. Okay?
Thanks.
I just love you so much.
All right. So I posted that on Facebook, right? First time I saw it, I wasn't paying attention to the words. I was doing something else and I was kind of glancing at the video. And my assumption was that she was fussing at her husband about something, right? So then I finally watched it with the sound and I read I was reading and whatever I couldn't hear, I read on the, on the screen. And I was just like, And it dawned on me. So I've been married and I've had a couple of significant relationships where I've provided those kind of resources. I never once heard anything like that. So I posted it and I noticed the response from men in the comment section, but also, and this is probably more significant, from the men that wrote me privately. And one of the things that I heard most consistently was, I have never heard anything like this, especially Black men. I had one white colleague of mine write me, and it was funny. He said, I don't understand what's significant about this. He said, my wife does this for me, not all the time, but he said pretty consistently. He said, you never heard this before? I said, no, never once. But the Black men that wrote me, right, the other 14 or so messages I got, all of them to a T, whether they were in their 20s and they were newly married, whether they were in their 70s and had been married multiple times, said, I've never heard anything like this. Never once. So it's not, it's the being needed, or as Reeves put it, neededness is one aspect of this, but being appreciated, not just needed, but actually appreciated. I'm concerned that there are far too many men that have never actually heard anything like that. I'm concerned about that. I really am. Give me a 2 if you've never heard anything like this from a significant partner of yours. Just put a 2 in the chat if you've never heard it. That's assuming, of course, that you've, played that role in somebody's life. But tell me. Give me a 2 if you've never heard that. Wow. Already coming in. Yeah. One brother even wrote in, that was wonderful to see. Yeah. You'd be surprised how many men found that clip moving. Just that. Out of nowhere. Right? And all the 2s come in. Cody said he missed it. You can go ahead and rewind. But look at all the 2s, right? These are all brothers that haven't seen it. This is one of the major reasons why men are withdrawing. It's not just not being needed. It's also not being appreciated for what you do, right? Especially in an era where men are, openly, women are taught to take men for granted, right? And that becomes part of the dynamic. Donnie, man, I did the same thing, Donnie. Donnie said I did keep an apology in my phone for 3 years. Yeah, I did that once too. I did. I only lost it because I bought a new phone. I was pissed. It didn't download. But yeah, I know what you mean. You hold on to it because you ain't seen it. Appreciate that, black males. Yeah, and you know what? And what black males did here by extending a brother some appreciation. This is something that we got to learn to do for each other, and really we got to learn to do for ourselves. And this goes to something that Passport OG was talking about in the video he just dropped today. He was talking about how we, talking about using words of affirmation. But at the end of the day, black men have to learn how to reinforce ourselves individually and each other as a collective, because for the most part, nobody's going to do it. Nobody else out there is going to even recognize the need. Tracy says, my second wife does this fairly often. My first wife never. I know brothers in their 60s who've been married 3 times who've never heard it. I got one brother who's in his 3rd marriage whose wife does do this, but just like Tracy, this is the first time he's ever heard it. And he would call me. He was so unprepared. He would call me and be like, I don't know what this shit is. Like, he would call me wondering if she was playing head games, and I'd have to be like, all right, well, what'd she say? And when he'd explain it, I'd be like, no, she's showing you appreciation. But he was so unused to it. He thought that the only reason it was happening was it was some kind of trick. It was some kind of way she was trying to exploit him. And it took him a couple of years to really actually believe her. Now, he never said anything negative to her when she would do these things. He would just kind of cock his eyebrow and look at her, tilt his head to the side, like, what is this? But after a couple of years and seeing consistent behavior, he learned to finally receive it. But he had never been extended that before. And he's got grown daughters, he's had this he's on his 3rd wife. Never heard it. And I got to give the brother his props. He's a hell of a provider, but never heard it. That's one thing, right? So that's one thing. But I want to share with you my initial response to this. Right? When I first posted on it on Facebook, and I want to just make sure that I give it to you the way I wrote it, and then we can talk it through a little bit. So, I basically said, because I just posted this yesterday, and I'm talking now about the Richard Reeves clip, not so much the little clip I just played for you. But in terms of this clip, I said, I don't entirely disagree. And I said, I think men not feeling needed is key to what's going on with men, young or old. But I think he overlooks disposability. There's a difference between not being needed and being used and thrown away like refuse. If, for example, men understand marriage to mean that they can be divorced and stripped of resources at a woman's whim, right, then be thrown away and left with nothing, adds a whole other element on top of not feeling needed. Being used and exploited suggests that you're worth less than somebody who doesn't feel needed. It means that your only real value is to be used and discarded. Right? I think this greatly contributes to men's frustrations and social dynamics. Men's frustration about social dynamics and family formation. This is the real reason why we're pushing for family court reform. And I say that because it's not just this, need to be needed. It's not just that you're dismissed, but that you can be dismissed and it's supported by policy. Right? It is going practice in family courts for men to be exploited and to be done so at a whim. In other words, the woman you lay next to can literally, push this button anytime she wants. And there's very little you can do about it unless you've gotten a prenup. And, those don't always hold. It's better to have one than not, but nothing's really a guarantee. And so when you add that to the discussion, when you add disposability to the discussion, it adds a whole nother dimension to where men are and this whole question of being needed. And that was one thing I think he needed to add to this discussion. I do agree with him that on a mass level, when you have society that is not only trying to tell you you're unneeded, but to, extend to you a great amount of disdain. Shout out to Larry on the Cash App. Appreciate that. A fair amount of contempt that you exist. And sometimes contempt for, the fact that they want you or need you or feel that you are necessary, but don't want to tell you, don't want to, share that information with you. You might get even more vitriol, right? Simply on the basis of that, but at the end of the day, I think what needs to be added to this discussion is not only male disposability, but state-sanctioned male disposability. This is baked into the culture because it's also baked into policy. It's not just an arbitrary thing that the woman you're dating can randomly do. It's something that she can actually go to institutions of law that we rely on as a society and do this with no blowback. And it's not just in intimate settings. In general, the desire to be needed and the desire to be appreciated and not be dismissed as disposable can take place on a lot of different levels. I just talked to a brother last week, a highly accomplished brother, got his doctorate, but is so far right now out of work. So we had a conversation about where he could find different types of work to use his doctorate. Brilliant brother. But he said something that got to me. He told me about multiple jobs. He wanted to work in an environment helping youth, and he applied to a number of them. And these were spaces that were predominantly female led. And he heard things like, I'm afraid of him because he's too masculine, to employers telling him the reason he didn't get hired is because they just believe a woman would be better in that position, even though he's extremely qualified. Now, in any other context, that's illegal. And I asked him, I said, well, have you actually looked into suing some of these places? And he said something to me that wasn't surprising, but hit me in the chest nonetheless. And he said, yeah, I've actually met with attorneys about the matter. And he said, and the thing they told me was, yeah, technically it's illegal, but we're not going to pursue it because it's not going to work. You can go to court, and even though what you're saying is legally, correct, you're still not going to get a judgment that you're looking for. At best, they'll get a slap on the hand. At worst, you're out, however many thousands of dollars you have to extend to finance this whole suit. And the brother is looking for work. So obviously that wasn't an option, right? But he had an incredible amount of training, an incredible amount of experience, and had a lot to offer every place he interviewed at, but was specifically told that he would not be appreciated. Shout out to Christopher for the cash app. He would not be appreciated simply because, they didn't want, they opted for a woman and felt that he had no value as a man in the spaces he was in. And we're not talking about, these weren't programs strictly for girls or anything of that nature. These were just, working with young men, young women, maybe even kids to some extent, but it was an administrative level. They were multiple administrative level positions. But my point in bringing all that up is simply to say, when we talk about male neededness, when we talk about dismissing disposability, right, these issues take on a whole nother context when we start to stretch them out beyond intimate relationships, and we start to look at the way the state plays into how these practices occur, how they have legal backing or institutional backing, and how these things also bleed into a culture over decades. And so this idea of not needing a man, this idea of male disposability becomes commonplace, just becomes a new norm. And what it's doing to society is leading us to a place that many really can't fathom, but they're not going to like it. So pay attention to some of these events, these emergencies that are taking place, the floods and the hurricanes and the fires. Right now, there's a fire going on in Northern California. To pay close attention, because these kind of emergency situations are a reminder how necessary men are. I mean, look at the Ukraine, right? When Ukraine first jumped off as far as the war was concerned, and they started conscripting men for war and put women on trains, women and children, you didn't hear any women complaining. You didn't see any feminist organizations standing up and saying women have a right to pick up a rifle and fight right alongside their men. You didn't hear any of that. None of it. And they cut through the gender and the LGBT stuff like a knife. They said if you were born a male, that's it. Trans or no, you're fighting. They cut straight through it. Right? They have no problem putting men to death. And women had no problem allowing it to happen and stepping all the way back. So when things get thick, we rely on this traditional model, but we don't want to reciprocate for men or to men what they've always been able to get throughout the generations. A degree of a modicum of respect, appreciation, right? So on and so forth. But those are that's being withdrawn now. And so now we're starting to experience something that we haven't really seen take place this way. this experience where men are checking out, even at young men, as young as 13, who are looking around and seeing that there is no immediate benefit to this. And the question becomes, what are people going to do when this hits a critical point, if it hasn't already? Yeah. So anyway, just wanted to put that on the table. I want to get your thoughts about it. I really want to see where you guys are on it, and what experiences have you had in alignment with this question of being needed or not needed, this whole issue of disposability, or being appreciated. I want to hear your examples. I want to hear your life experiences. Tell me what's going on with you. So at the end of the day, just wanted to drop that real quick. Told you guys we weren't going to be here all night, but I thought it was an important one. And I'm curious to know. I mean, everything right now, if you're not talking about the upcoming election, I'm surprised that YouTube lets your video run. But at the end of the day, I still want to, put these questions on the table, because if men continue to find themselves unsupported, right, I'm concerned about what it does to men, especially when they brought up suicide. But I am also concerned with what happens to society, and whether or not we reach a critical point where it's too late. So anyway, that's all. Just want to put that out there. Appreciate y'all coming through. Give me your thoughts in the comment section. Peace.